Easter Sunday. There are two very important days in what you might call the Christian calendar going through the year. One of them at Christmas and one of them at Easter. But the special celebration of those days, though they go back a very long time, do not go all the way back to the New Testament times. And that creates a little bit of a dilemma for us. Because here we are in this culture with these special days, but as the Church of Christ, here's what makes us what we are. We're turning to the New Testament to say, let's do things the way the New Testament church did them. Now, let's don't take things away that the New Testament did. Now, some have done away with taking the communion every Sunday, and they'll just do it on special Sundays. Well, in the New Testament, they didn't do that. They took the Lord's Supper every Sunday. Let's do that and not take that away. But let's also be careful that we don't add things to the New Testament that church did not do. And then we come up with Christmas. Well, the traditions of that go back through the years, but they don't go back this far. No one knows the date which Christ was born. And the New Testament, they never celebrated the birthday of Jesus the way we do in our culture. So what do we do with a day like Christmas if we say we're going to go back to the New Testament? Well, we look at that and, wow, we're not going to celebrate a special holy day. We know people are interested in the birth of Christ at that time. And maybe it'll open some doors of opportunity for us to say, look, we're going to talk about the birth of Christ because that's where people's interests are. And we want to use that to pull them into everything the Bible says. And the same thing with Easter. But let me tell you something about Easter Sunday. There's more precedent for that than there is for Christmas. Because the events leading up to Easter was the Passover. When Jesus partook with his disciples the Last Supper, it was the last time he would eat the Passover with them. And then the reason they took Jesus down from the cross, because that next day was a high day. It wasn't just a normal Sabbath day. It was the Sabbath of the Passover week. And then Jesus arose on that following day, on the first day of the week. And the Jews were told how to find the Passover in the year. Now, down through the years, there's been a little dispute about just exactly when that day was. And so in the eastern part of the world, sometimes they have Passover a week different than the western part of the world because of that dispute. But because we know when Passover was, and it's not the same time each year, it's not a set date like December 25th, the Passover moves for about 30 days back and forth when it could fall. And so because of that, we know that Jesus rose from the dead on the first day of the week following the Passover week. So it's not as unknown as when when Jesus was born. We don't know when that day was. But there is some precedent for deciding when he rose from the grave. And that is such an important event in the story of Christ, his resurrection. But even so, when you turn to the New Testament, if you trace the history of what we call Easter Sunday back through time, before we get to the New Testament, it disappears. There was no annual Christian calendar in the New Testament churches. But there was a weekly celebration because Jesus rose on the first day of the week. It's on the first day of every week. We get together and worship. And we partake of the Lord's Supper to remember his death and his burial. And the very fact that we're here on the first day of the week should remind us of his resurrection. But it wasn't an annual day that the church in the New Testament celebrated. but a weekly day. Now, if we're going to do things like the New Testament did, if we're going to do like New Testament churches, that's what we're going to do. But at the same time, when we know that people are interested in our culture and the resurrection at this time, it certainly is an appropriate time to talk about it, isn't it? Who would be able to say, well, now on this day you can't talk about the resurrection? Oh, that would be as wrong as saying on this day you have to talk about it. You're not going to add to nor take away.